Shalom, Israel. How's everybody doing? All right, so tonight's lesson is Bible Preservation Timeline. All right, a little bit of historical lesson, but we're covering the aspect of the history of the Bible. All right, so a few things we're going over is pretty much how did the Bible become what we know today as this book, this codex or this collection of books. So we're gonna go over a little bit of that. All right. So first thing is we're gonna get the long story short, all right? Timeline of the Bible. So let's get the Bible as we know it. So what we identify today as the Bible is a complete codex. So, but it did not start as we see it today. So KJV and, Cambridge and all these other things and, it didn't start off like this. So let's get a Zondervan Compact Bible Dictionary. This is page 81 where it says Bible. It says the collection of books recognized and used by the Christian church as the inspired record of God's revelation of himself and of his will to mankind. So that's what we're dealing with. Names, it says the word Bible is from the Greek word biblia, meaning biblion, the meaning of biblos, meaning book. From biblos, papyrus. In ancient times, papyrus or papyrus was used in making the paper from which books were manufactured. So that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with the scrolls. So it's all to do with the prophets. So the prophets received the prophecies from the Most High. So let's get Psalm 68 and 11. Psalm chapter 68 and verse 11.
Psalm chapter 68, verse 11. The Lord gave the word.
Who gave the word?
The Lord gave the word.
See that? It says the Lord gave the word. Read.
Great was the company of
Few?
those. Great was the company of those that published
It
it.
said, great was the company of all those that published it, all those that put it in the writing and put it in the book format, which are known as scribes. So the scribes are the ones who were the writers. They would be writing all the time these things that were given. So now let's go ahead and get Exodus 34 and 27. These are all things they had their writing instruments and all those things. Get Exodus 34 and 27.
Exodus chapter 34, verse 27. And the Lord said unto Moses, write thou these words, for after the tenor of these words.
He said, do what?
Write thou these words.
So, of course, we had to write. We had to do a lot of writing. So Moses, he was a scribe, as well as a prophet. He was writing the words of the Most High. So let's get a definition of scribe. So it says scribe. May you read that loud?
Scribe, a person who serves as a professional copyist.
See that when you read in the Bible, a lot of times in the Old as well as the New Testament, many times you read the New Testament, the scribes, that was a person whose profession was to copy the scriptures. All right. So read on.
Especially one who made copies of manuscripts before the invention of printing.
Right. Some people say, well, wasn't no Bible, the whole, printing press wasn't invented. Yeah, it was. It was you, the individual. We had individual scribes. That was their occupation, to write and to rewrite. Every time they went to job, they 9 to 5, they was clocking in. Yeah, man, what you doing today? Writing the book of Isaiah. That's as far as they got. But go ahead.
A public clerk or writer, usually one having official status.
Also called sofer. So now, let's continue on. Of course, it says a writer or author, and to act as a scribe, meaning to write. So now, let's get Ezra 7 and 6. Let's get Ezra chapter 7 and verse 6.
Ezra chapter 7, verse 6. For upon the first day of the first month began he to go up from Babylon.
Nah, it's Ezra, EZRA.
Yeah.
Chapter 7, verse 6.
Oh, my bad. Salakia. Ezra chapter 7, verse 6. This Ezra went up from Babylon, and he was a ready scribe.
He was a ready what?
He was a ready scribe in the law of Moses.
See that? So, Ezra, he was a ready scribe. He was always writing. He was one of the prophets, but he was also a scribe. So, read on.
which the Lord God of Israel had given.
So the same thing. Same thing Moses wrote. Hey, these are the same things that were being translated, verbatim. So that's what all the scribes that probably had to do. They had to copy these things verbatim. So the early books, let's see what they're written with. So a lot of the early books were written with, you had reed pens, quill pens, then of course later on you have fountain pens and ballpoint pens and, things of that nature. But your earlier pens were more so aspects of, quill, things of that nature. Get Isaiah chapter 8 and verse 1. We had writing utensils the whole nine. People make it seem like we ain't had nothing. Stone man, caveman.
Isaiah chapter 8, verse 1. Moreover, the Lord said unto me, take thee a great roll.
He said, look, don't take you a small roll. You got a lot of writing to do. He said, take thee a great roll. Read.
And write in it with a man's pen.
See that? He said, write in it with a man's pen. We had pens. Wasn't like the same one like today, but it was the beta version. Go ahead.
And write in it with a man's pen concerning Mahar Shalab Hashbaz.
There you go. All right. So now, of course, pen. Get the definition of that, dictionary.com. Of course, it says, any of various instruments for writing or drawing with ink or similar substance, which, of course, you read from the early ones. You have the quill pen, the feather, things of that nature. So a quill or a pen feather. Those are some of the early ones that you had. So, of course, ink, same thing. We had ink, which is pretty much a fluid or viscous substance used for writing or printing. So you have many different pens. So, of course, 3500 BC, it said the first language to ever be written down was Sumerian, carved and chiseled into stone walls or tablets. So and then, of course, it said the next prominent form of writing could be found in ancient Egypt, which emerged 500 years later. Papyrus became their writing material of choice, and Egyptians developed an ink and tool to be used on papyrus or papyrus. So, and he had many more evolutions of the pen and things of that nature that made it everything it is today. So now, early books. Let's get what early books were written on. So one of the key words you'll read is, or you'll find, is parchment. May you go ahead and read the definition of parchment?
Parchment, the skin of sheep, goats, etc., prepared for use as a material on which to write. A manuscript or document on such material.
So parchment differed a little bit from papyrus, seeing that papyrus or papyrus was primarily from a plant, whereas parchment was primarily from an animal. So those are the key differences in which we use for different writing materials. So now, let's go ahead and get this next one. So now let's go over with papyrus or papyrus. So now what I want you to do is we're going to get the definition of papyrus or papyrus. So you can go ahead and read this one. Go ahead and read it.
Papyrus, a tall aquatic plant. Cypress papyrus of the sedge family, native to the Nile Valley, the Egyptian subspecies. Papyrus Haddadi, thought to be common in ancient times, now occurs only in several sites. A material on which to write, prepared from thin strips of the pith of this plant laid together, soaked, pressed, and dried, used by the ancient Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans.
Read on.
An ancient document, manuscript, or scroll written on this material.
Right, so these things were made, and this is what we had as far as books. It was all scrolls. This is what we had. So even when you read here, when it says definition of papyrus, papyrus, it says a plant like reed or rush, which grows in swamps and long rivers or lakes, often to the height of 12 feet, with beautiful flowers at the top. The stalk is triangular in shape, something like a giant celery stalk. In ancient times, it was found mainly a giant celery stalk. You smacking on my papyrus? What you doing? That's my book. Eating my book. All right, but it says in ancient times, it was found mainly along the Nile in Egypt. but was also known in Palestine. For commercial use, the stalk was cut into sections about a foot long, and these pieces were then sliced lengthwise into thin strips, which were shaped and squared and laid edge to edge to form a larger piece. Go ahead and read that one for me live.
The manufacture of papyrus was a flourishing business in Egypt, where baskets, sandals, boats, and other articles were made of it. It was not unknown among the Hebrews.
See that? So, contrary to some people's teachings, it wasn't unknown among the Hebrews. This is what we use too. It's a common thing to write with. It's kind of like paper. Most people know about paper today, so it's just common. Go ahead.
And some believe that the Ark of Moses was made of papyrus. But the most common use of the product was for writing material, so much so that papyrus became the name for writing paper. The art of making papyrus goes back to 2000 BC, and it was the common writing material in the Greek and Roman worlds from 500 BC until AD 400, when vellum largely replaced it. There is little doubt that the New Testament books were written on papyrus.
See that? So when it comes down to the New Testament books, they were primarily written on papyrus. So read on.
The material was also called charts.
See that? Charts. Yeah, I did with papyrus. Read on.
In Greek, and John no doubt wrote the second epistle on such paper. For long books, rolls or scrolls. Many pieces of papyrus were glued together and rolled up.
So see that? It says for long books, which those long books back then were rolls or scrolls. So that's what made books. When you go to the library, which I'll bring in later on, that, when you go looking for a book, you wouldn't look for the cover you see today. You'd be looking for a lot of times, aspects of long rolls and long scrolls that you'll find on the shelves. So it said many pieces of papyrus were glued together and rolled up. Such a roll was called biblos or biblion, from which our word Bible is derived. So when you're dealing with Bible, you're dealing with the collection of books. So now let's go ahead and, with this one we're going to get, that's where we use papyrus. But when we wrote, we did not use punctuation marks. That's one of the key things. This is from century1.com, and this is primarily dealing with aspects of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So I want you to go ahead and read number 16 at the top.
One of the most curious scrolls is the copper scroll.
Copper scroll, because we wrote on other materials too. Copper, things of that nature, silver, but read on.
Discovered in Cave 3. This scroll records a list of 64 underground hiding places throughout the land of Israel.
Right. Skip down to read 19.
19. The scrolls are most commonly made of animal skins, but also papyrus and one of copper. They are written with a carbon-based ink from right to left.
So see that? We used ink the whole nine. Read on.
Using no punctuation except for an occasional paragraph intonation.
Right. So see that? Didn't use punctuation, but did use the occasional paragraph indentation. So read on.
In fact, in some cases, there are not even spaces between the words.
See that? How careful you got to be writing. You can't just have anybody writing as a scribe. Like, what the hell is this?
Man.
It's missing words and letters and smudges. So, but when we get the early books were scrolls. So we deal with definition of scroll. Go ahead and read that, number 1 and then number 3.
Scroll, a roll of parchment, paper, copper, or other material, especially one with writing on it. A scroll containing the entire Old Testament.
Right. So you see that? So read number 3.
A list, roll, roster, or schedule.
See that? The same thing. List, roll. Also has a note, message. So go ahead and read Isaiah 8:1 again, because it's the same thing when he said this in verse 1.
Isaiah chapter 8, verse 1. Moreover, the Lord said unto me, take thee a great roll and write in it with a man's pen.
See that? Take thee a great roll. That was a scroll. So it's missing the S and the C, but still a roll. Scroll, roll is still the same thing. Most High making mention of. So this is an example of that. So this is an example of that great scroll. You don't unravel it and you just just goes on and on and on with different books and different writing. You see that? It looks like it's all old, glued together, things of that nature. So that's what you have it. These are some of the old ancient scrolls. So the parchment just glued next to each other to make it very long and things of that nature. So many scrolls, these are all books. You know, it's like, pass me that book of Isaiah over there. Nah, that ain't it. That's Leviticus. You know, pass me another book. Keep rolling. You got to keep rolling. So they can have them separately like this or all together like one big book. So now, here's the next question. Well, where's the original Bible? That's what some might ask. And this is from biblicalarchaeology.org. Go ahead and read this one at the bottom.
And as far as answering the question, where is the original Bible? And whether such a thing even exists, we don't know. But to all scholars and biblical archaeologists, we can offer this advice. Keep digging.
Right. There's a big reason why you don't know. Get Jeremiah 36:4. Because remember, you're not going to find an original Bible. Why is that? Because the aspect where the scrolls were always rewritten. And remember, it was a situation where in all our temples, you had many scribes. You know, from the time of Christ, you read, even as we're going over tonight, you had many scribes all throughout Israel. They weren't just copying just like one grand Bible. They were copying many Bibles. It's kind of like right now finding, like you go to a job interview, you got a resume. It's like finding the original resume. It's like when you get a resume, you make like 4 or 5 copies of them. It ain't just like one. So the same thing they were doing back then, they had multiple copies they was making of. So it wasn't just, this one scroll. No, they had multiple scrolls they was making. Go ahead and read that, Jeremiah 36:4.
Verse 4. Then Jeremiah called Baruch, the son of Neriah, and Baruch wrote from the mouth of Jeremiah all the words of the Lord, which he had spoken unto him, upon a roll of a book.
See that? Baruch with Jeremiah scribe. So Jeremiah the prophet, everything he would prophesy, he tell him to Baruch, write it down. So all these things were just copied and translated. Get 2 Chronicles 34. And read. You can read 12 down to 15.
2 Chronicles chapter 34, verse 12. And the man did the work faithfully, and the overseers of them were Jahath and Obadiah, the Levites, of the sons of Moriah, and Zechariah, and Meshullam, of the sons of Kohathites, to set it forward, and other of the Levites, all that could skill of instruments of music.
Read on.
Also they were over the bearers of burdens, and were overseers of all that wrought the work in any manner of service. And of the Levites, there were scribes and officers and porters.
So the Levites, down in the backbone of like everything in Israel, except like going out to war. Everything else, they had to take care of. They had to bear the burden. So even like now, you wouldn't have just like anybody like myself teaching the word in this format. It would be the Levites. They were the primary ones doing all of that. They were the primary doctors, healers, nutritionists, priests, everything. They did it. So go ahead and read on.
Verse 14. And when they brought out the money that was brought into the house of the Lord, Hilkiah the priest found a book of the law.
He found what?
He found a book.
He found a book, meaning there are many books. He found a book of the law. It wasn't just like it was just one, it was many of them. He found a book of the law. Read.
Hilkiah the priest found a book of the law of the Lord given by Moses. And Hilkiah answered and said to Shaphan the scribe, I have found the book of the law in the house of the Lord. And Hilkiah delivered the book of Shaphan.
Right, which was just a scroll. So remember, scrolls became old, worn out, damaged, had to be rewritten constantly by the scribes. You can't have something like that forever.
All right.
You know, so you have to eventually get a new one. So nations, you also had nations such as the Greeks would also burn the books or even the libraries. So get 1 Maccabees chapter 1, verse 56. These things you had constantly, but I was getting burned, destroyed, ripped up. So go ahead and get an example of that. This is the time of the Greeks.
1 Maccabees chapter 1, verse 56. And when they had rent in pieces the book of the law, which they found, they burnt them with fire.
See that? Rent the piece of the book of the law and burnt it with fire. But this right here is another example of a library. You see that it's all scrolls. So this is a painting of the library in Alexandria, so Egypt. Vast library. But of course, when it was under Esau, Edomite, so-called white man's rule. So you would read and you check out books similar to today. Only difference was how the book looked. Now this is Alexandria Library after it was destroyed. It said, burn, baby, burn. All right. Now, get Isaiah 30 and 8.
Isaiah chapter 30, verse 8. Now go and write it before them in a table, and note it in a book.
See that? He said, write it before them in a table. So we use stone, but also paper. And that's why it says it, note in a book. Read.
That it may be for the time to come forever and ever.
Right. Because remember with these laws, remember all these teachings we were getting at first, it was just all orally. Some people say, you know, how come you just can't teach me? Remember, all these things were just all orally taught. So when people, I mean, they're not completely wrong when they say, you know, you don't need a book, you just teach and talk to them, and that's to a degree, you know, because the aspect where, yeah, I can talk to you and teach you, but if I want to preserve the things I'm telling you for the next generation, what do? You note it in a book so that the next generation can have it, or so that multiple people can have it. So those are things you do. Note it in a book, write it down so the next person can have it. And that way the same, that way the same thing gets repeated without being any sort of mistranslations or errors or problems, things of that nature. Read on. Oh, get Psalm 68 and 11.
Psalm chapter 68, verse 11. The Lord gave the word.
Who gave the word?
The Lord gave the word.
Read.
Great was the company of those that published it.
See that? The Most High gave the word, and this is great was the company of those that published it. So you had different authors, but still one book, one spirit. Get Tobit 101. Tobit chapter 1, verse 1. I'm gonna read the book of Tobit chapter 1, verse 1. Go ahead, Doc.
Tobit chapter 1, verse 1.
Read it.
The book of the words.
What?
The book.
It says the what?
The book.
See that? The book. Read.
Of the words of Tobit.
See that? The book of Tobit. That is a book. It doesn't matter if it's only a couple pages long. It's still a book. So, get Baruch 101. Baruch chapter 1, verse 1. Go ahead and read it.
Baruch chapter 1, verse 1. And these are the words of the book.
Of the what?
And these are the words of the book.
The book. Read a book. Read.
Which Baruch.
So see that? First you had the book of Tobit. Now you get the words of the book, which is Baruch. Get 2 Maccabees 8:23. And then we're going to go to John. 2 Maccabees chapter 8, verse 23.
2 Maccabees chapter 8, verse 23.
Uh-huh.
Also he appointed Eleazar to read the holy book.
To read what?
To read the holy book.
See that? When Eleazar to read the holy book. But still get John 19 to 20 because you also had different languages. Don't think it was just all one language. Get John to the 19, verse 19 to 20. So you had translators the whole nine.
John chapter 19, verse 19. And Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross. And the writing was Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
This title then read many of the Jews, for the place where Jesus was crucified was nigh to the city, and it was written in Hebrew
So first and foremost in Hebrew, but what other language?
and Greek
And Greek. Read on, what else?
and Latin.
And Latin. So it was written in other languages. We made sure that you had great libraries where you had to make sure you keep all them books, keep a record, everything written, all the languages. But you also had to let's get the translation of the scriptures. Get Isaiah 34 and 16. Most High always preserved his word.
Isaiah chapter 34, verse 16. Seek ye out of the book of the Lord and read.
And what?
Seek ye out of the book of the Lord and read.
Read on.
No one of these shall fail.
No one of these, meaning no one of these prophecies, no one of these writings shall fail. Read on.
And none shall want her mate.
Mate is a companion. This book don't need no companion. It can do bad all by itself.
By itself.
Do it so good it don't need nobody else. All right? So read on.
For my mouth it hath commanded,
See that? Most High's mouth commanded. Read on.
and his spirit it hath gathered them.
He said his spirit has gathered them. He said his spirit is gathering. All right. Get Isaiah 28 and 11.
Isaiah chapter 28, verse 11. For with stammering lips and another tongue will he speak to his people.
All right. Hold on. Yeah, slow down. All right. So when it says, for with stammering lips, stammering, you get H3934, meaning foreign. All right. So when it says with stammering, it says for with foreign lips and another tongue dealing with language. So when he deals with foreign lips and another language, will he speak to this people? Most already knew he was going to be speaking different languages. Get Deuteronomy 28 and 49. Because he also knew we go into captivity multiple times.
Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 49. The Lord shall bring a nation against thee from far, from the end of the earth, as swift as the eagle flieth, a nation whose tongue thou shalt not understand.
See, that nation whose language thou shalt not understand. So what will happen? We learn new languages. Now let's get the Zondervan Combat Bible Dictionary, page 82. Can you read that?
Languages. Most of the Old Testament is written in Hebrew.
See that? Most of the Old Testament written in Hebrew. The other part of it is Aramaic. Read on.
The language spoken by the Israelites in Canaan before the Babylonian captivity, but after the return giving way to Aramaic, a related dialect generally spoke in throughout Southwest Asia.
Right, so it's related. They're very similar. Aramaic is just another dialect of Hebrew. I mean, generally the same language, just different dialect. So just like some of our people, you know, whatever it is, Salvadorians may speak a different dialect. Spanish compared to Mexican make them speak different dialect of Spanish compared to Puerto Ricans. But it's all Spanish, different dialects. So same language. Read on.
A few parts of the Old Testament are in Aramaic. The ancient Hebrew text consisted only of consonants, since the Hebrew alphabet had no written vowels. Vowel signs were invented by the Jewish Masoretic scholars in the 6th century and later. Except for a few words and sentences, the New Testament was composed in Greek, the language of ordinary intercourse in the Hellenistic world.
Right. So now, languages we speak today stem from Hebrew. You know, as with English and Latin and what that, Etruscan, Paleo-Greek, Phoenician, Paleo-Hebrew, Ancient Hebrew. You know, a lot of them, many similarities. You know, so now Let's get page 83, translations.
Translations. The Old and New Testaments appear very early in the translations. The Old Testament was translated into Greek between 250 and 150 BC.
Right, that's the LXX, the Septuagint, which we'll get into. Read on.
And other translations in Greek appeared soon after the beginning of the Christian era. Parts, at least, of the Old Testament were rendered into Syriac as
Syriac.
early as the 1st century. And a Coptic translation appeared probably in the 3rd century. The New Testament was translated into Latin and Syriac c. 150, and into Coptic c. 200. In subsequent centuries, versions appeared in the Armenian, Gothic, Ethiopic, Gregorian, Arabic, Persian, and Slavonic languages.
Right, the Coptic ones are more so the Egyptian translations, you know, things of that nature.
Finish it off.
Oh yeah, finish it off.
The Bible in whole or in part is now available in more than 1,100 different languages and dialects.
Right, and most of them make sure Israel all over the world got to make sure they hear this word. So now we talked about the Hellenists. Let's go ahead and get that definition.
Hellenists, Jews who made Greek their tongue, and with it often adopted Greek ideas and practices.
Right, so that's what we're dealing with. Israelites, Jews, that made Greek their tongue. I speak Greek now. You know, our people get. All right, so we already got, of course, John 19 through 20, the different languages, things of that nature, written in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Let's get a little bit on the Septuagint, all right? So many of our people were Hellenized and spoke Greek, and thus needed a Greek translation of the scriptures. Let's get Zondervan Common Bible Dictionary definition of Septuagint. Let's read that.
Septuagint, the first and the most important of a number of ancient translations of the Hebrew Old Testament into Greek. The story of the origin of the Septuagint is told in the letter of Artius.
So see that? This here, the Septuagint is the first and most important of many, of course, as we'll deal with, ancient translations. So the first one you're dealing with is the Septuagint, all right? So written sometime between 150 and 250 BC. Go ahead.
A pseudepigraphical book written in the second half of the 2nd century BC. It states that Ptolemy II called Philadelphus, the king of Egypt, 285 to 247 BC, wished to have a translation of the Jewish law for his famous library in Alexandria. At this request, the high priest Eleazar of Jerusalem sent 72 men, 6 from each tribe, to Egypt with a scroll of the law. In 72 days, they translated one section each from the scroll, and afterwards decided on the wording together. So the version was called Septuagint, the translation of the 70 abbreviated LXX.
So that's what you have. That's where the LX come from, is Septuagint. So same thing. So someone says, you know about the LXX, it deals with the Septuagint. You know, so Septuagint, Septi, you know, Septi meaning 7. That's where you get September. September really is the 7th month. So, but in this case, Septuagint dealing with 70, but 72. So dealing with all the men that actually wrote it, just rounded. All right, so now let's get more. This is from Septuagint.net, and we're going to read about the Septuagint a little bit.
Septuagint. What is it? Septuagint, sometimes abbreviated LXX, is a name given to the Greek translation of the Jewish scriptures. The Septuagint has its origin in Alexandria, Egypt, and was translated between 300 and 200 BC, widely used among Hellenistic Jews. This Greek translation was produced because many Jews spread throughout the empire were beginning to lose their Hebrew language.
See that? Each time we're around other nations, we started to lose our language.
Customs of the heathen.
Man, read on.
The process of translating the Hebrew to Greek also gave many non-Jews a glimpse into Judaism. According to an ancient document called the Letter of Aristes, It is believed that 70 to 72 Jewish scholars were commissioned during the reign of Ptolemy Philadelphus to carry out the task of translation. The term Septuagint means 70 in Latin, and the text is so named to the credit of these 70 scholars.
Continue on, please, sir.
Septuagint, influence on Christianity. The Septuagint was also a source of the Old Testament for early Christians during the first few centuries AD. Many early Christians spoke and read Greek. Thus, they relied on the Septuagint translation for most of their understanding of the Old Testament.
They were what?
They relied on the Septuagint translation for most of their understanding of the Old Testament. The New Testament writers also relied heavily on the Septuagint, as a majority of Old Testament quotes cited in the New Testament are quoted directly from the Septuagint. Others are quoted from the Hebrew text.
Right. So a lot of times when you deal with, because remember the New Testament, there was no New Testament. So when you're dealing with the time of, Rome and, you're dealing with, Christ and disciples, they didn't have a New Testament. They were reading the Old Testament. And one of the things they were most likely reading, due to them being, in the Hellenistic era, they were reading more so the aspect of the Septuagint, things of that nature, or copies of it, and then of course with other, texts that may have been around. Go ahead.
Greek church fathers are also known to have quoted from the Septuagint. Even today, the Eastern Orthodox Church relies on the Septuagint for its Old Testament teachings. Some modern Bible translations also use the Septuagint alongside Hebrew manuscripts as their source text. Septuagint, what does it contain? The Septuagint contains the standard 39 books of the Old Testament canon, as well as certain as well as certain apocryphal books.
Which we'll get into. Read.
The term apocrypha was coined by the 5th century biblical scholar, Jerome, and generally refers to the set of ancient Jewish writings written during the period between the last book in the Jewish scriptures, Malachi, and the arrival of Jesus Christ. The apocryphal books include Judith, Tobit, Baruch, Sirach or Ecclesiasticus, the Wisdom of Solomon, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, the 2 books of Ezra, additions to the book of Esther, additions to the book of Daniel, and the prayer of Manasseh. The apocryphal books were included in the Septuagint for historical and religious purposes, but are not recognized by Protestant Christians. My bad. Protestant Christians or Orthodox Jews as canonical, inspired by God. Most Reformed teachers will point out that the New Testament writers never quoted from the apocryphal books, and
and that's something that, as we go on, that's not true. The Apocrypha is just as much part of the Bible as the New Testament or Old Testament. Read on.
And that the Apocrypha was never considered part of the canonical Jewish scripture. However, the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox churches include the Apocrypha in their Bible, except for the books of Ezra and the prayer of Manasseh.
Right. So now, let's continue on. All right, so here you kind of get, I'm going to skip that. We'll go over it more as time goes on. I'm going to give you more of a timeline. That was just generally a timeline, but it'll be more confusing. So now we're going to do with the Apocrypha. So once again, books written during the Israelites' captivity, primarily under the Greeks, but also under the Persian Mede Empire. So the Apocrypha wasn't a book like this. This is how many you might find it online, for like $10 or less. But rather a collection of scrolls written approximately 200 BC to 100 AD. That's what you're dealing with the Apocrypha. So go ahead and I'll read. This is from KingJamesBibleOnline.org. It says Apocrypha. The Apocrypha is a selection of books which were published in the original 1611 King James Bible. These apocryphal books were positioned between the Old and New Testament. It also contained maps and genealogies. The Apocrypha was a part of the KJV for 274 years until being removed in 1885 AD. Portions of these books were called deuterocanonical books by some entities such as the Catholic Church. Go ahead and read this one for me out. This is from the IVP Concise Atlas of Bible History.
The Apocrypha. The books of the Apocrypha, a Greek term meaning hidden, were written in the period between the Old and New Testament. Later Jewish and Protestant Christian opinion did not regard the Apocrypha as authoritative, Slakia, or canonical.
Right, so now here's the thing. Just because, Jewish people or Protestants who protested certain aspects of Catholic faith didn't find the Apocrypha canonical doesn't mean that it's not. So keep that in mind. Read on.
The Catholic and Orthodox churches accord the Apocrypha canonical status, but there is not complete agreement as to which writings should be included. We only quote 1st and 2nd Maccabees, which are valuable historical sources.
Right, but the other ones can also be proven, be the word of the Most High. So another one you read is from there, you have aspect like with the Vulgate, which all these things would go in depth with later on. It's just giving you a basis. So this is once again from Vulgate.org. Go ahead and read this, dealing with the Latin Vulgate.
Vulgate. The Vulgate is a Latin version of the Holy Bible, and largely the result of the labors of St. Jerome.
Now remember, we read about St. Jerome earlier. He's the one that coined the term Apocrypha, because he found these books like, hold on, where these books come from? It's not part of the Old Testament, not part of the New Testament. It was written sometime in between. All right, I'm just calling them Apocrypha, just the hidden books. Read on.
Eusebius Sophronius Hieronymus, who was commissioned by Pope Damasus in 382 AD to make a revision of the old Latin translations. By the 13th century, this revision had came to be called the Versio Vulgata, that is the commonly used translation, and ultimately it became the definitive and officially promulgated Latin version of the Holy Bible in the Catholic Church.
Right, that's where you get more of that. Of course, we'll go more to history another time, but just go ahead and read the underlying portions.
God. Jerome described those books or portions of the books in the Septuagint that were not found in the Hebrew as being non-canonical. He called them Apocrypha, but they are found in all complete manuscripts and editions of the Vulgate. Of the Old Testament texts not found in the Hebrew, St. Jerome translated Tobit and Judith anew from the Aramaic.
Right, so see, anew from the Aramaic, read.
And from the Greek, the editions of Esther, from the Septuagint, and the additions to Daniel, from Theodotion.
So Theodotion, one of the other translators which you read when we go back to So Theodotion was where you see here one of the translations of the Septuagint. So you had one of them by Theodotion, one of them by Symmachus, and one of them by Aquila. So all three of them made translations of the original Septuagint. All right, go ahead.
The others, Baruch, Wisdom of Solomon, Ecclesiasticus, 1st Maccabees and 2nd Maccabees, 3rd Esdras and 4th Esdras, the Prayer of Manasseh, Psalms 151, and Laodiceans, retain and Vulgate manuscripts are old Latin renderings. Their style is still markedly distinguishable from St. Jerome's in the Vulgate text. St. Jerome's translations from the Greek of the additions to Esther and Daniel are combined with his separate translations of these books from the Hebrew. St. Jerome's preface to the Vulgate version of the New Testament. You urge me to revise the old Latin version, as it were, to sit in judgment on the copies of the scriptures which are now scattered throughout the whole world. And inasmuch as they differ from one another, you would have me decide which of them agree with the Greek original. The labor is one of love.
You see that? You said, man, the copies of the scriptures are now scattered throughout the whole world. So remember, there's always copies. He said, you would have me decide which of them agree with the Greek original. So the labor is one of love. So, you know, when you look at a lot of these translations, it wasn't just, all right, I'm just going to copy it. Now, all these men, they made sure to diligently compare. Diligently make sure, let's look at, you know, what's out there. Let's make sure we try to keep everything intact, word by word. You know, we'll read more of that later. We read, you know, that we'll skip that this time. So, of course, you know, you do many of the books of the Dead Sea Scrolls are archaeological proof of the Apocrypha. You know, so these things you'll have, you know, they had the Book of Tobit, Book of Sirach. All these things were found in Dead Sea Scrolls, you know, along with, you know, other ones, Lamentation, Epistle of Jeremiah, Esther, Chronicles. So, now let's get more proof. Apocrypha is part of the Bible. Let's get John 10:22.
John chapter 10, verse 22. And it was at Jerusalem, the feast of the dedication, and it was
that?
winter.
So how is it, if the Apocrypha is not part of the Bible, how did they know about the Feast of Dedication? Where do you find that history? You find it in the Apocrypha. 1 Maccabees 4:59. Go ahead and read that.
1 Maccabees chapter 4, verse 59. Moreover, Judas and his brethren with the whole congregation of Israel ordained that the days of the dedication of the altar should be kept in their season.
In their season. What season did we read about in John 10:22? In the winter. Read that one, and then read the next one in 6 Maccabees 10:5-6. Read on.
Moreover, Judas and his brethren with the whole congregation of Israel ordained that the days of the dedication of the altar should be kept in their season from year to year by the space of 8 days, from the 5th and 20th day of the month Caslu, with mirth and gladness.
So see that? Kept it with mirth and gladness. So let's go ahead and read on. 2 Maccabees chapter 10, verse 5-6.
2 Maccabees chapter 10, verse 5. Now upon the same day that the strangers profaned the temple, on the very same day it was cleansed again, even the 5th and 20th day of the same month, which is Caslu. And they kept the 8 days with gladness, as in the Feast of the Tabernacles.
Right, so they even knew about Feast of Tabernacles, kept in the same way. So now, how was Tabernacles kept? You get that in Leviticus 23, 34-36. So, you know, these are the same things. You know, the Feast of, you know, dedication. We don't actually, you know, we don't really have to read it. The main points is that, like it says, you know, the Feast of Tabernacles for 7 days, 8 days. So on the 8th day should be a holy convocation unto you. The first and the last day were holy convocations. You know, so the same thing. That's why the Feast of Dedication, 8-day feast, just like with Tabernacles. So now, let's get another example. Let's get Matthew 1:11. And we're going to get Baruch 1:9.
Matthew chapter 1, verse 11. And Josias begot Jeconias and his brethren about the time they were carried away to Babylon.
Right. And this thing that the Apocrypha also attests to, which you can get in the book of Baruch, chapter 1 and verse 9.
Baruch chapter 1, verse 9. After that, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away Jeconias and the princes.
And the princes, which is Jeconias, like you read in Matthew 1:11, Jeconias and his brother. So, you know, that was when he carried away, led them away, Jeconias and the princes. Read.
And the captives, and the mighty men, and the people of the land from Jerusalem, and brought them unto Babylon.
Right. Same thing like we read in Matthew 1:11. You can also, you know, read again, just like we got with Matthew 1:11, get with Josias. You know, you read about Josias and Ezra. Read 1 Ezra chapter 1 and verse 1 and then 20-21. Well, I mean, it's all together right there. We go ahead.
1 Ezra chapter 1, verse 1. And Josias held the feast of the Passover in Jerusalem unto his Lord, and offered the Passover the 14th day of the first month. Verse 20. And such a Passover was not kept in Israel since the time of the prophet Samuel. Yea, all the kings of Israel held not such a Passover as Josias. And the priests, and the Levites, and the Jews held with all Israel that were found dwelling at Jerusalem.
Right. After Josiah, he begat Jeconiah, and that's when they're carried away into Babylon. So, these are things just to show the history, everything lines up. You're finding both in the Old Testament, New Testament, Apocrypha, it's all adding up. We're not seeing an aspect where it's foreign or something that's different that's not adding up the way it should. So now here's the next thing. Well, the scriptures corrupted due to translation. Let's get this from Time Magazine. Well, of course, since it says Time. But it says 27,000 corrections, but no secret Da Vinci Code. So it says erasures, additions, corrections, substitutions. Sinaiticus, which is the Sinai text, one of the codexes, which we'll deal with later on, reveals a Bible in process. So between the 4th and 12th centuries, various scribes changed earlier colleagues' bad spelling. So that's the key thing. It wasn't just changing, everything around. It was just primarily grammatical errors, things of that nature. Remember, aspect where you didn't have verses in the scriptures originally. That was added in. So that was added. Didn't have exclamation points like that, and all these other punctuation points. Those things were added in, so things of that nature. You didn't have a interlinear like in the middle. You have it to where it has other scriptures that may be talking about something similarly. You didn't have that before. Now you do all these things, were added in, and of course, bad spelling, because not everyone that was writing had the best spelling. And then think about it, writing so many books, you're going to make errors. So I want you to read this once again with Septuagint.net. I want you just once again dealing with the Septuagint. Is it a reliable translation? Let's go ahead and read the first part of this.
The discussion, Slakia, my bad. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls has helped to shed light on this question. Discovered in the Qumran region near the Dead Sea beginning in 1947. These scrolls are dated to as early as 200 BC and contains part of every book in the Old Testament except Esther. Comparisons of the Dead Sea Scrolls to the Masoretic texts and the Septuagint show that
Yes, typo on there. See that? See, people make typos all the time. That where there are differences, that's what it's saying. That where there are differences.
Now, where there are differences between the Masoretic text and the Septuagint, approximately 95% of those differences are shared between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Masoretic text.
See that a lot of those differences are shared. Read.
While only 5% of those differences are shared between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint. Does this mean that the Septuagint is unreliable and that our Old Testament is wrought with contradictory sources?
Right, because that's what a lot of people that are against the Bible, it's just filled with contradictions and all this other stuff, and people rewrote it, and how it's correct, and because there's a written record of these things. You can go back and see that nothing has been taken out of context. Read on.
No. It is imperative to note that these variations are extremely minor.
Extremely what?
Extremely minor.
What is that? I.e., meaning that is. Read. Grammatical errors. Read.
Errors. Grammatical errors. Spelling differences are missing words.
Right.
And do not affect the meaning of sentences and paragraphs.
And do not what?
And do not affect the meaning of sentences and paragraphs.
Right. So at the end of the day, you're getting the same thing. You're not getting something that's major that's affecting how does everything is laid out. Read on.
An exception is the book of Jeremiah, in which the actual passages are arranged differently.
So see that? Exception in the book of Jeremiah where the actual passages are just arranged differently. But you're still getting the same idea of what's being told to you. It's no different than if I said, I walked in with crimson shirt and black pants and sat down. What's the difference between me saying that and then Lob sat down out on a crimson shirt, black pants?
Right.
So you're still getting the same thing, it's just rearranged differently. So read on.
None of the differences, however, come close to affecting any area of teaching or doctrine. The majority of the Septuagint, Masoretic texts,
It
and
says none of them come close to what?
none of the differences, however, come close to affecting any area of teaching.
So see that? It don't come near any area of teaching or doctrine. Read.
The majority of the Septuagint, Masoretic texts, and the Dead Sea Scrolls are remarkably similar and have dispelled unfounded theories that the biblical text has been corrupted by time and conspiracy.
See that? Because most people think it's conspiracy, it's corrupted. Well, it's over time. How you gonna take it? I mean, we tell stories all the time. You tell it to one man, tell it to the next man, it changes. Well, yeah, that's why we kept record of it, kept it written down. So all you had to do is copy the next word. Read.
Furthermore, these variations do not call into question the infallibility of God in preserving his word. Although the original documents are inerrant, translators and scribes are human beings and are thus prone to making slight errors in translation and copying.
And that's the thing people forget, man. You're dealing with people. We make errors all the time. It doesn't mean anything, you know. So it's an aspect we still imagine. You try copying a book and see how many errors you make, especially one as extensive as the Bible. Heck, you just see how you do just faring with one of your children's books in the room, just copying everything verbatim, let alone trying to copy something as wordy as a novel or something like that. Read on.
Hebrew scribal rules attest to how exacting scribes were. Even then, the Bible has redundancy built into its text, and anything significant is told more than once.
Right. That's one thing the most I say, look, if you missed it here, I'm going to tell you again and again. So it has redundancy built in it. It's a no-brainer system. Read on.
If grammatical mistakes were introduced that makes a point unclear, it would be clarified in several other places in Scripture.
And that's the key thing. The scriptures help clarify themselves. It's a backup for your backup by the backup. So let's get the integrity of the New Testament. It's from Bible.ca. So let's go ahead and let's read. We're gonna read. Yeah, we can read all of this.
God. What about the variances in the early texts?
Oh, can you read that live?
Yeah, I got you.
That's some good eyes. Huh?
Most High willing. As we know it today, there are around 138,000 words in the Greek New Testament. There are literally hundreds of thousands of variants where there is not uniformity of wording. On average, for every word in the Greek New Testament, there are almost 3 variants. The large number is due to the large number of manuscripts. Are these differences capable in changing the meaning of the intent of the original authors? No. An overwhelming majority of alterations are accidental and trivial. Textual differences are typically divided into 4 categories. 1, spelling and nonsense errors.
Right. So you deal with a lot of these differences, and once again, the lights alterations are accidental and trivial. It's just small stuff that people make a big deal out of. So, of course, the first category is spelling and nonsense errors. Read that.
This is by far the largest of the categories, and the majority of these are spelling differences that have no impact on the meaning of the text.
That have what?
That have no impact on the meaning of the text.
That's the key thing. No impact on the meaning of the text. Read on.
For example, in the Greek, John is spelled 2 different ways. The same person is in view, but the difference is in whether the scribe decided to spell John using 2 N's or 1. Another common difference found in Greek
Those are
manuscripts.
some of the petty things. Someone will say, here it's John. Why is it John here and John over here? Nah, it's just all corrupted. You know, can't believe that book. Read on.
Another common difference found in Greek manuscripts is similar to the 2 forms of the indefinite article in English. These variances are so insignificant that most textual critics ignore them. Scribes who are tired or inattentive often created nonsense errors. For example, Codex Washingtonianus
Yeah, go ahead.
contains an error where a scribe wrote the word, and instead of the word Lord, in the Greek, wait, Salakia, let me start that over.
No, you're right.
Oh, yeah, okay.
He wrote the word and instead of the word Lord.
Come on. So he wrote the word where a scribe wrote the word and instead of the word Lord. In the Greek, the two words are very similar.
Right. So someone in English said, well, why I say and here? It's supposed to say Lord, but it's like we're understanding the Greek, like it's saying the two words are very similar. Kai and Kurios. So they're written similar in that language, you know, so sometimes you may have that in certain languages where certain things may sound the same or seem similar in that particular language. So you may have that. So now we're going to get, so as it says, and I'm going to keep reading. So contains an error where scribe wrote the word and instead of the word Lord. And it says in the Greek, the two words are very similar, kai and kurios. And mistake probably happened due to mental fatigue. You know, that's one thing you're probably looking at. So mental fatigue was probably a situation because, of course, a lot of times these scribes are working late. You know, that's one of the things you often have. A lot of time they're working late. So that's why I said in the overall context, the usage of the word and does not change the meaning of the text. So just because it changed the word. So go ahead. That's when there's minor changes and alterations that do not affect translation.
This category consists of variations in the usage of a definite article with proper names. Sometimes Greek uses the definite article with proper names while English does not. For example, in Luke chapter 2, verse 16, some manuscripts identify Mary and Joseph as the Mary and the Joseph instead of just Mary and Joseph. In other manuscripts, the article was not used. Also, word order differences account for many of the discrepancies. An example of this can be seen in a sentence such as Jesus loves John. In Greek, that sentence can be expressed in at least 16 different ways without affecting the basic sense.
Right. So it can be, you know, changed and reworded to where it's like the same way when we say certain things in English. There's so many ways to say the same thing. You know, when you could say one didn't make a good decision, one should have made a better decision, one didn't make a wise decision, one made a dumb decision, one made a stupid decision. It's still, at the end of the day, like, you know, the same general context where, all right, you just didn't make a good choice. But it's just seeing how do you want to say it. That's all it is. So continue on.
Word order changes are frequent in the manuscripts, yet these do not affect the basic meaning of what is being said.
Right, because at the end of the day, even like I just mentioned, for example, in English, you still understand what it is I'm trying to say or convey to you. So regardless of which way I use to say it, read on.
Meaningful changes that are not viable. One example is found in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 9. A late medieval manuscript from the 13th century uses the phrase, the gospel of Christ. This is a meaningful change, but not viable because almost all of the other manuscripts use the term, the gospel of God. Other examples are seen throughout the Gospels, as scribes often tried to harmonize the wording between the gospel accounts. When they did so, they included to add material to one gospel rather than take away material from another.
Read on.
Meaningful and viable variants. This represents about 1% of all textual variants. In these cases, the difference in the manuscripts can affect the understanding of a passage. Daniel Wallace identifies 3 significant examples.
Right. And so you had 3 examples that he talked about, which, of course, read that in Romans 5 and 1, this one at the bottom.
Romans chapter 5, verse 1. Some manuscripts read, we have peace, while others say, let us have peace. In the original language, the difference in the word is found in one letter. If we have peace is authentic, Paul is speaking about believers' status with God. If you let us have peace is authentic, the apostle is urging Christians to enjoy the experience of this harmony with God in their lives. As important as their textual problem is, neither variant contradicts any of the teachings of Scripture elsewhere, and both readings state something that is theological sound.
Right. So you still get the aspect of what it is that scripturally is trying to be conveyed. You know, you're not getting anything that's just off the wall. You know, so this is someone dealing with, you know, there's differences, a chain in scripture. Well, these are definitions we're breaking down. Well, what changes are you seeing? You know, what differences are you seeing? Read the next one in Mark.
Mark chapter 16, 9 through 10. And John chapter 7, verse 53 through chapter 8, verse 11. Are omitted in the earliest manuscripts and do not fit well with the style of writing of the authors. Even if one were to take away these passages, no essential matters of doctrine are changed.
Right, and that's the key thing. Essential matters of doctrine. No different than people saying, well, yeah, we had other books. We had plenty of books. We had cookbooks and all that other stuff, but that doesn't change the aspect of the important things of the law. Read that next paragraph.
What are we to make of these variants? Should our faith be shaken? Absolutely not. For more than 2 centuries, most biblical scholars have declared that no essential affirmation has been affected by the variants. In their attempts to recover the originals, textual critics have recovered at least 95% of the inspired words. Some even go further, placing the number as high as 99%. Scholars such as Philip Comfort have ascertained that while there are different conclusions in some of the variants in the manuscripts, this is by no means a large number.
Right.
And this should not cause us to abandon the task of recovering the original wording of the New Testament. New insights have come and will keep coming. In the new form of actual documents, new methodologies, and new understandings. Another scholar writes, the verbal agreement between various New Testament manuscripts is closer than between many English translations of the New Testament, and the percentage of variance in the New Testament is small.
Right. So the verbal agreement between various New Testament manuscripts is closer than between many English translations of the New Testament, and the percentage of variance in the New Testament is small. So read on.
And no matter of doctrine hinges on a variant reading.
Right. So no matter of doctrine hinges on a variant reading. So you don't have to worry about that aspect. So read on.
Think about the first part of Wegner's statement. These are thousands of Greek manuscripts available.
So there are thousands of Greeks. There are
thousands of Greek manuscripts available, coming from different times and places. They agree more often than our English translations. Amazing.
Amazing. All right, so now we're going to get this from BibleManuscriptSociety.com, which this is one dealing with the Leningrad Codex, which, you know, we'll deal with later on. But I want you to go ahead and read this. That's outlined, just that middle paragraph, nevertheless. Comparing the
Leningrad Codex to modern Hebrew Old Testament proves how accurately God's word has been preserved.
So I'll go over this codex another time. A lot of these codex I'm going to go over, but, you know, just for right now, just get the aspect when we're dealing with the preservation of his word. Read on.
In fact, the Leningrad Codex is so reliable that, as noted above, most modern printed Hebrew Old Testaments take it as the official Hebrew Masoretic text, which they use, and it is the Hebrew text from which nearly all modern translations have been translated.
Right. So all these aspects of manuscript codex are just proving how accurate the Most High's word is and has been for thousands of years. Read that from the top.
Consider just how amazing and incredible the Leningrad Codex is. Unlike modern printed editions, which can be mass produced by computer typesetting, every word, every letter, and every dot in the Leningrad Codex was carefully copied by hand by the scribe, Samuel ben Jacob. No computers or typesetting were available in those days. Despite this, and despite the passage of more than 1,000 years, the Leningrad Codex provides irrefutable proof that the Hebrew Old Testament has remained unchanged
Has remained what?
has remained unchanged down through more than 1,000 years, copied faithfully from manuscripts 1,000 years earlier.
Right. So here it is. Faithfully, word by word, over time. We didn't lose it. So now, dealing with the King James Version, which will get, things added, go ahead and, you could go ahead and, read that. Just read the highlights.
King James Version. When Elizabeth died in 1603, the crown passed to James I, who had been King of Scotland for 37 years. As James VI, several months after he ascended the throne of England, he authorized a new translation of the Bible to replace the Bishop's Bible. 47 of the best Hebrew and Greek scholars of the day were divided into 6 groups: 3 for the Old Testament, 2 for the New, and 1 for the Apocrypha. 2 of the groups met at Oxford, 2 at Cambridge, and 2 at Westminster. When a group had completed its task, its work was submitted to 12 men, 2 from each panel. Final differences of opinion were settled at a general meeting of each company. In cases of special difficulty, learned men outside the board of revisers were consulted. Marginal notes were used only to explain Hebrew and Greek words to draw attention to parallel passages.
Right, and that's where you have, while I was doing the interlinear, the passages in the middle, those things were added in. Go ahead and read on.
Italics were used for words not found in the original, but
Right,
necessary.
so that's where you deal with, all these aspects of italics. All these things were added in later. So when you deal with, especially deal with, all the time, the doctrine of, Christ. When it deals with, now the birth of Jesus Christ was, on this wise, and deal with, Joseph, as her husband, as was supposed, and things of that nature, that as was supposed was italics added in later. When you deal with the, father of Christ and as was supposed, those are italics. They were added in later. So everyone knew, for example, in that regard, that, Joseph was the father. So, but nevertheless, those things were added in. So that's where you get, once again, the same scriptures, Most High will preserve his word. So now let's get copies. So Dead Sea Scrolls, Qumran Scrolls, location, and we'll get this. Just go ahead and read number 1, and then we'll skip down, and we'll read number 5.
Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 11 caves along the northwest shore of the Dead Sea between the years 1947 and 1956. The area is 13 miles east of Jerusalem and is 1,300 feet below sea level. The most fragmented texts are numbered according to the cave that they came out of. They have been called the greatest manuscript discovery of modern times. 2.
No, number 5.
Oh, number 5. There are now identified among the scrolls 19 copies of the book of Isaiah.
19 what?
19 copies of the book of Isaiah.
So that's what I'm saying. We made copies of books. We had multiple copies. It wasn't just like one book and that was it. It was lost. Oh no, lost Isaiah. Damn, that was my book, bro. Nah, it wasn't like that. We had multiple. But like such it was lost forever. They be mad lost his book. Man, that prophet was on point, dog. Can't believe you lost that book. Where'd you put it? What was you doing with it? Should have never took it out the library. Man.
See, what happened was,
If I was a scribe, I'd be mad. You know how long I was writing that book? Because even then, with with a lot of these books, it wasn't just something people just finished like in a couple months or years. Some, man, to years. writing for years with these things. 'Cause remember, people still had lives and, other jobs, things of that nature, and then making sure things were made right. Took years, man. Read on.
They are now identified among the scrolls. 19 copies of the book of Isaiah, 25 copies of Deuteronomy, and 30 copies of the Psalms.
See that? So, books were copied, separately, different copies depending on the book. So, things of that nature. So now, of course, getting asked for the copies. Nah, that one's all right. We good on that one. And then let me see. Nah, we all right with that. Yeah, let's get Exodus 30 and 30 real quick. So we did with one of them is, where the tribe of Levi was responsible for teaching the people, particularly the priests and the sons of Aaron. They're responsible. We'll go ahead and read that real quick.
Exodus chapter 30, verse 30. And thou shalt anoint Aaron and his sons, and consecrate them, that they may minister unto me in the priest's office.
Right. So Aaron and his sons were primarily the ones that would minister unto the children of Israel. Get number 35 and 2. So they were responsible for the teaching and edification, like I was dealing with earlier. But let's get Numbers 35 and 2. Read that.
Numbers chapter 35, verse 2. Command the children of Israel that they give unto the Levites of the inheritance of their possessions cities to dwell in. And you shall give also unto the Levites suburbs for the cities around about them.
Right. So what's the significance of that? That showed the Levi just wasn't in one place. It was all throughout the land of Israel. And what do you think they had to do when they was at in order to minister unto their people, like we read earlier? They had to have copies of the books. You can't just be, hey, I'll get a Sabbath day. You got to hurry up. Next hour, I need that. I need that Leviticus next hour. I'll hurry up. We need it up north, So we need it. Like, imagine, like, the land of Israel was big. Imagine, like, the whole state of California being the land of Israel. So, I mean, just in general. It's an aspect where, man, hurry up. What y'all doing in San Diego? We need it in San Francisco. Man, y'all need to hurry up. You know how long it's going to take me to get up there? It's like, nah, it wasn't just one copy just being passed around. Like, damn, who got it? You had it last. What you do with it? Where numbers at? You dropped it?
Forgot
Where the
it.
book?
Got to go back and pick it up.
Man, dropped the book of Numbers. Man, smudged the ink. They ripped the page. But nevertheless, so they had to be amongst all Israel so they could teach all Israel. All right, let's go ahead and get 2 Chronicles 34 and 13. I don't think we were reading this one earlier. So Levites, they were making those copies. They were scribes.
2 Chronicles chapter 34, verse 13.
Read that.
Also, they were over the bearers of burdens, and were overseers of all that wrought the work in any manner of service. And of the Levites, there were scribes, and officers, and porters.
Right, so see that? Levites were scribes. They had to do the writing. Now we need some early Bibles. So Bibles that were published before the 1611 KJV Bible, which we're not going to get into at this time, but you have the Miles Coverdale, the Great Bible, the Genevan Bible, the Bishop's Bible, Thomas Matthews Bible. So you had all those different versions. We're not going to get into that right now, but why the KJV? Why the 1611 KJV Bible? This is from BibleBC.com. Can you make that out, or you can't make it? You need me to read it? All right, I'll read it. So translation of scripture at the Hampton Court Conference convened by King James I in 1603, John Reynolds, the head of the Puritan Church in England, proposed a new English translation of scripture. So when people say King James wrote the Bible, no, he did not write the Bible. It's far from the truth. So it was John Reynolds who proposed a new English translation of scriptures. He proposed it to King James. King James authorized. That's why the Bible says it's the authorized King James Bible. King James being the head, authorized for the translation. Now, why? Because once again, So a New English Translation Scripture that would unite the churches and the people of England. Reynolds' goal was one universal authority or standard for all English-speaking Christians. There was division and strife between the churches and the people over the two primary English translations of the time, the Bishop's Bible, like we read earlier, and the Geneva the Geneva translation, as I mentioned earlier. The Bishop's Bible, published in 1568 by leaders in the Church of England by the authority of Queen Elizabeth, was the official Bible for use in the churches. The Geneva Bible, produced in 1560 by exiled Protestant leaders in Geneva, Switzerland, have been adopted and embraced as the beloved Bible of the common people. So once again, all Reynolds wanted to do was bridge the gap, get a pure version. So although both translations were made from the same textual foundation, the Textus Receptus Greek, which is Textus Receptus means the received text. So there's many received texts, but in this case, the Greek. So you deal with the Septuagint and the Masoretic text of the Hebrew. In many places, the English renderings differed, resulting in strife and confusion between pulpit and pew. King James received Reynolds' proposal gladly and was anxious for work on a new English Bible translation to begin. Dun, dun, dun. So we'll get more into, King James later on, but we dealt with italics added later, things of that nature. Let's get John 8:32. Joshua. I think we read this, right? And he wrote there upon the stones a copy of the law of Moses, which he wrote in the presence of the children of Israel. So even that. So even on the stones, wrote a copy. Joshua wrote a copy in stone. So he said, look, keep it forever. So once again, let's get this from the IVP Concise Bible Atlas of the Bible History, page 10. What is the Bible? And let's read this here.
One Bible, two testaments. The word Bible is derived from the Greek word biblia, meaning books. Essentially, the Bible is a collection of 66 books, divided into two testaments, or covenants. The Old Testament is a record of God's revelation to his people, Israel. It was written by 30 writers over about 1,000 years. Its main language was Hebrew, although
That's crazy. Even the heathen know that. Old Testament is all written in Israel. So for Israel, by Israel. Read on.
its main language was Hebrew, although a few short portions were written in Aramaic. The New Testament is a record of Jesus' life and ministry and the establishment of the church.
Right.
It was written in Greek.
So it's primarily written in Greek. Read.
But 9 different writers in the second half of the 1st century A.D.
Right, that's what we're dealing with. Now you have your codex or your codices. So you're turning this on the right into this on the left. That's what you have to do. Change it. Reverse. All right. So now let's get a codex. What does codex mean?
Codex, a quire of manuscript pages held together by stitching. The earliest form of book.
The what?
The earliest form of
It said
book.
the earliest form of book. Read.
Replacing the scrolls
Out with the old and with the new. Read.
and wax tablets of earlier times.
See that? Also the code, a book of statutes or laws. It's a manuscript volume, especially an ancient one. See that? You finally take that and you put that all together, that quire. So what's a quire? So it says bookbinding, a section of printed leaves in proper sequence after folding. So standard unit for selling paper. So you have a quire, your book, you're binding it together. So that codex is a binding together of manuscript pages. So usually by stitches, like our books of today, like our Bible today. So the goal was to take this and bam, turn it into this. This being a codex, this one literally being the Codex Sinaiticus, a complete Bible. So look at it. Still look at it, looking like a book. Look at it. All 1,000 years old, looking like a book, huh? That's what I need. Let's get a little bit of Codex Sinaiticus. It's from codexsinaiticus.org. Go ahead and read that paragraph.
Codex Sinaiticus is one of the most important books in the world. Handwritten well over 1,600 years ago.
Look at that, handwritten over 600 years, looking like a book. All right, go ahead.
The manuscript contains the Christian Bible in Greek, including the oldest complete copy of the New Testament.
Oh, read.
Its heavily corrected text is of outstanding importance for the history of the Bible, and the manuscript the oldest substantial book to survive antiquity.
See that? We're not doing this. This is the oldest substantial book to survive antiquity, oldest historical book. All of the books ain't surviving. You know, you deal with other writers and, you know, other philosophers, you know, who was it? You know, aspects of Socrates and, you know, all these other, you know, Homer and all these, you know, other writer things that nature antiquity. This beats all of their written things and works and all of that nature. This beats it as far as being more intact and I would say whole. So you also have the Aleppo Codex, which, you know, we'll get into. Of course, it's just an example. You have the original manuscripts to, you know, translate it to your different codexes, you know. So your Codex Alexandrinus, Codex Sinaiticus, Codex, you know, Britannicus, then your other ancient copies, and, you know, you get the Latin Vulgate and Masoretic text and all these other translations later on, but it's just a short version, you know, so. But nevertheless, you know, these are just the main things, you know, to leave you with. Later on another time, I'll go into all the more history of the codexes individually, but this was just to give you, I would say, a synopsis of the Bible preservation timeline, all right? So with that, I hope you got something out of it. Any questions? Any questions in class? Online, all right, we're good. All right, so family, hope you got something out of that. You know, I hope it was enjoyable. So with that, go ahead and say shalom. We'll close out.